Hi there! Today we're going to talk about a book that is about books, about reading, about getting lost in Gothic drama, but then maybe also realizing that life isn't actually fiction. Yes, we're doing Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. Welcome aboard the International Express to Book Central. Grab a seat, settle in, and let's while away the journey with some book chat. I'm your host Jules, and I'm really excited to talk about Northanger Abbey today. I just reread it for a book club, and although I read Northanger Abbey when I went through my massive Jane Austen phase almost 20 years ago, not quite, more like 15, but still, I obviously had read Northanger Abbey, I knew about Northanger Abbey, I'd watched a BBC adaptation and absolutely loved it, and still, I had somehow forgotten how fun and amazing this book is. So that's why I'm very excited to talk to you about it today. I'm first going to give you a little bit of brief background just so that we know where we're at time-wise and where this novel fell in Jane Austen's career. And then we're going to dive into our plot description. And I am going to cover the entire plot. I'm of course not going to give all the details, but most of them, so that you know what this book is about, and then I can really only recommend that you read it yourself. And then at the end, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about the value of reading, the Gothic novels that Jane Austen talks about, and more. Yeah, I think that's what we're going to do. So, first, a brief description. Jane Austen has written many novels that are incredibly well known, and Northanger Abbey is one of these. She probably started writing it in 1794, and based on letters from her sister Cassandra, it is assumed that she finished writing it around 1799. People have come to these conclusions because some suggest that the tone in the novels is a bit more juvenile than in her others, not in the sense that it is badly written, but that the tone, the style reminds them of her more juvenile writing she did when she was younger. And yet she also references novels that weren't published yet when she maybe started writing it in 1794. So that's how we get to that timeline. In 1803, she then sold the book to a publisher, Crosby & Co., for an entire £10. That sounds insane nowadays, but, you know, inflation, money changes value. So she sold it to Crosby & Co., and then they just sat on it and did nothing with it, to the point that Jane Austen at a certain point was like, can I have it back then? Because I would like to have this published. And Crosby & Co. was all like, no, we will sue you if you try and publish it elsewhere. Finally, in 1816, Crosby & Co. then did sell the book back, not to her, but to her brother, Henry Austen, again for £10. And Jane Austen then started doing rewrites. When she had first sold it, the novel was called Susan, which means the main character was also called Susan. But she changed this after it was sold back. Then, unfortunately, she died, and it is a great loss to humanity. Her brother, Henry, then retitled the book to its current name, Northanger Abbey, and he sold it to publishers, and it was then published in December 1817, although the frontispiece usually says 1818. Now, the reception was a little bit mixed from what I've been able to see, but I think it has developed into quite something of a classic. Perhaps it's not as well known or as beloved as Pride and Prejudice, but what book is? Not even Jane Austen's own books can live up to the brilliance that is Pride and Prejudice. But Northanger Abbey is amazing, and what I find really interesting is that it was published alongside one of her other novels, Persuasion. Now, the main characters of Northanger Abbey, Catherine Morland, and Persuasion, Anne Elliot, could not be more different, right? Catherine, as you'll see when we go through the description, is this young, naive, optimistic, imaginative young girl. And Anne Elliot is a woman in her maturity. She's not old, especially not by modern days, but by Regency dates, she is a spinster almost. She is quite withdrawn, Anne Elliot is. She is somewhat unsure about herself, but she also holds very strong convictions, but she's not as free with herself as Catherine Morland is, right? But what the two novels do share is the location of Bath. And maybe that's why it does make some sort of sense for them to be combined. They obviously were combined because they're both published posthumously, so after Jane Austen's death. But I feel like they make very interesting comparison pieces if you take them next to each other. Okay, I think that gives us a little bit of initial information. And now I think we're just going to dive into our plot. As always, I'm going to start with the opening line, and I'm going to read you quite a bit of the opening paragraph, just so you get a taste of what the writing is like. No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her born to be a heroine. Her situation in life, the character of her father and mother, her own person and disposition were all equally against her. Her father was a clergyman without being neglected or poor, and a very respectable man, though his name was Richard, and he had never been handsome. He had a considerable independence, besides 2 good livings, and he was not in the least addicted to locking up his daughters. Her mother was a woman of useful plain sense, with a good temper, and what is more remarkable, with a good constitution. She had 3 sons before Catherine was born, and instead of dying in bringing the latter into the world, as anybody might expect, she still lived to have 6 children more, to see them growing up around her, and to enjoy excellent health herself. A family of 10 children will always be called a fine family, where there are heads and arms and legs enough for the number. But the Morlands had little other right to the word, for they were in general very plain, and Catherine, for many years of her life, as plain as any. She had a thin, awkward figure, a sallow skin without colour, dark lank hair, and strong features. So much for her person, and not less unpropitious for heroism seemed her mind. She was fond of all boys' plays, and greatly preferred cricket, not merely to dolls, but to the more heroic enjoyments of infancy, nursing a dormouse, feeding a canary bird, or watering a rose bush. Indeed, she had no taste for a garden, and if she gathered flowers at all, it was chiefly for the pleasure of mischief. At least so it was conjectured from her always preferring those which she was forbidden to take. Such were her propensities. Her abilities were quite as extraordinary. She never could learn or understand anything before she was taught, and sometimes not even then, for she was often inattentive and occasionally stupid. That is how we meet our heroine, Catherine Morland. Now, as you can hopefully already tell, Jane Austen is being sassy from this very start. And what she's doing here is, from the very first line, literally, telling us this is going to be a novel about a heroine, and unfortunately my heroine is not really ready for the task. Catherine is not the only one who's read a lot of Gothic fiction, so has our narrator. Here, quick, it's important, from a literary studies perspective, to make a slight differentiation between the figure of the author, the historical Jane Austen that we know, the narrator of the novel, who of course is influenced by Jane Austen, but we have to take the narrator as a separate instance, and then of course the character of Catherine Morland. So our narrator, she knows what is required of a heroine, and she's struggling with the fact that Catherine is not really bringing the goods. So, Catherine is a little bit stupid, she's a little bit silly, and she's not very pretty, so that doesn't really help. However, by the time she turns 15, things are changing a little bit. She starts being more interested in her appearance, she starts thinking about balls, and she even pays a little bit more attention to what might be required of her. She reads a lot, and that is really the best thing a heroine can do. So we get a little bit of insight into what she learns from all the important works like Shakespeare and Pope, but really what she prefers most are Gothic novels. Another thing that works against Catherine at the beginning is that she is living, well, with her family, and there's not a whole lot of other stuff going on. There are no exciting families, there's no sort of secret heirs to large fortunes that casually stumble through their little village. So what is to be done? Well, quite thankfully, one of the families living near Catherine and hers are the Allens, Mr. and Mrs. Allen. and they are going to go to Bath for the season. And because they don't have any children of their own and are quite fond of Catherine, they invite her to come with. Her parents are like, yes, of course, no problem, look after her, I'm sure all will be well, and Catherine is delighted. Now, here again, as she sets off on this journey, our narrator is sort of like, we might expect these kind of dramatic farewells, we might expect her mother, Mrs. Morland, to give her all kinds of advice to not fall into the hands of strange men. But no, Mrs. Morland is a very straightforward woman, and she's like, here's your money, don't spend all of it at once, if you need any more, let us know, have fun. They set off, and also the journey itself, where you might expect to be caught by bandits or have some other misfortune happen. No, the journey is fine, actually. And so they arrive in Bath, and everything is lovely in Bath. But we do need to know, also, that although Mr. and Mrs. Allen are lovely, it is necessary to know that Mrs. Allen is not a very wise woman. Nothing interests her more than her dresses, the quality of them, the muslin that gets used. And well, the way that the narrator puts it is that she doesn't really have any independent thoughts of her own on anything else. On their first evening in Bath, Mrs. Allen takes so long getting dressed that by the time that they get to the ballroom, it's already quite late. And now the biggest issue emerges, which is that they don't actually currently know anyone in Bath. This might not seem like anything of an obstacle to us nowadays, but back in the day, you couldn't just simply go up to people and be like, hi, I don't know anyone here. Is it okay if I come sit with you? Who are you? What are you doing? We needed more formal introductions. And so, because they don't know anyone, even though they are at a ball, Catherine can't dance with anyone. They don't have anyone to talk to. They don't have people that they can sit down and have tea with, etc. And so they're sort of just wandering around this ballroom, isolated, and Catherine is deeply uncomfortable by all of this. Admittedly, Catherine is a lovely girl, and so it's not like she's complaining. She's more like, this is a bit uncomfortable. Why? We don't know anyone. What are we going to do? And Mrs. Allen keeps saying like, oh, well, I wish we knew anyone so that you can dance with them, but we don't. And so, quite simply, they leave, and there's not a whole lot that happened during this first ball. However, Catherine is enjoying Bath, and quite soon, something happens that somewhat changes their fortunes. They go to the lower rooms, and here, Catherine is introduced to a young man named Henry Tilney. He's about 24, 25, she's 19, that's an age gap that we're going to accept in this context. And they dance, and he is lovely. I do really like Henry Tilney, I have to say. It sort of depends, we can get back to it a little bit towards the end, but it depends on how you read him. I think he does a lot of teasing, but I like to read it in a positive way. They have a little bit of a chat, and he's like, what are you going to write about this in your journal? And she's like, I don't keep a journal. And he's like, all women keep journals. How are you going to keep note of what dresses you wore and what shoes and how this strange man came to dance with you and started bothering you about your journal? And Catherine's like, again, I don't write a journal, but wouldn't you say that women write better than men? And so they have this whole conversation. Again, if you read it as this kind of teasing back and forth to people who don't really know each other, Henry Tilney going off his assumptions of what young women are interested in, and Catherine just coming into this world having no idea what anyone might be interested in except what she knows, then it becomes very fun. And Mrs. Allen is deeply impressed by Henry Tilney as well, because he recognizes the muslin that she's used for her dress. And he seems to know something about dresses and about the qualities of the right materials, because we're told he has a sister and he often helps her in choosing her gowns. So Mrs. Allen is like, a man who understands fashion? Ugh, the best. And so Catherine is developing a little bit of a crush. Because of this, she now gets ready every day with the expectation of seeing Tilney again and hoping that he'll dance with her again and that they'll get to have a fun chat again. But unfortunately, when they get to the pump room the next day, now a quick note on what the pump room is. The city of Bath in England, Somerset, is called Bath because it used to have Roman baths. It of course still has a lot of these buildings, etc. But the pump room is called such because it was next to these Roman baths, and that is where the water would get pumped to feed into the hot springs, right? It is no longer a bath. It is now just a fancy, nice room where people meet and wander, etc. So we see the pump room a lot in Northanger Abbey. It is a place for fashionable people to meet and to see one another. And we also see a lot of this in Persuasion. So they are wandering through this pump room, and she's like, "Where is Mr. Tilney?" However, in the midst of Catherine's admittedly mellow dismay, they have the good luck of running into friends of Mrs. Allen. They sit by accident next to a Mrs. Thorpe, who she used to go to school with. Now, these two women haven't seen each other in decades, and so they spend some time comparing, contrasting, the kind of conversation where it's not really a conversation. Everyone is just giving details on their own life and waiting for a chance to brag a little bit more. And the downside for Mrs. Allen is that Mrs. Thorpe has loads of children that she can brag about. But what makes Mrs. Allen happy is that she can see that at least her dresses are of a better quality than Mrs. Thorpe's. Now, the children of Mrs. Thorpe are important. She has 4 of them that we know of: a daughter, Isabella, 2 other daughters who are less relevant, and a son, John Thorpe. He is currently at Oxford studying. They show up and they're all introduced, and suddenly Catherine has a friend. And what is even more exciting is that Isabella's like, "Miss Morland, you look so much like your brother." And it turns out that John Thorpe is studying at Oxford with James Morland, which is her eldest brother. So they already have this connection because Mrs. Thorpe and Mrs. Allen are friends, and now it turns out that they also know her brother, and so Catherine is super excited, and she almost forgets that she was looking for Mr. Tilney because, quote, "Friendship is certainly the finest balm for the pangs of disappointed love." Now, everyone can be happy to be in Bath. Mrs. Allen knows people, she knows that her dresses are beautiful, and Catherine and Isabella strike up a very fast friendship. And this is in part based on the fact that they love to read novels. Both Catherine and Isabella are absolutely obsessed with Gothic horrid novels. And so if there's nothing else for them to do because it's raining, they sit inside and they read together. And quite honestly, what is a better base for friendship than to read the same kind of books? Now, here I'm going to quote again, because part of the joy of Northanger Abbey is how much Jane Austen is invested in both making fun of Gothic novels and people who get dramatic about them, but also how strongly she believes that it's important to read. So here we go. "Yes, novels. For I, the narrator, will not adopt that ungenerous and impolite custom so common with novel writers, of degrading by their contemptuous censure the very performances to the number of which they are themselves adding, joining with their greatest enemies in bestowing the harshest epithets on such works, and scarcely ever permitting them to be read by their own heroine, who, if she accidentally take up a novel, is sure to turn over its insipid pages with disgust. Alas, if the heroine of one novel be not patronized by the heroine of another, from whom can she expect protection and regard? I cannot approve of it. Let us leave it to the reviewers to abuse such effusions of fancy at their leisure, and over every new novel to talk in threadbare strains of the trash with which the press now groans. Let us not desert one another. We are an injured body. Although our productions have afforded more extensive and unaffected pleasure than those of any other literary corporation in the world, no species of composition has been so much decried. From pride, ignorance, or fashion, our foes are almost as many as our readers." So, our narrator is fully in favour of Isabella and Catherine bonding over their novels. And they keep talking about books. Isabella gives Catherine an entire list of Gothic novels, and she's like, "You must read these. They are absolutely horrid." And we're starting to get, if you're an attentive reader, you're starting to get the slight impression that Isabella always has very strong opinions. And, she's like, "I would die for my friends." And then 2 sentences later, though, she sort of forgets about this friend and is maybe a little bit mean about them, right? So we're like, okay, what is Isabella up to? Isabella seems to be dropping hints about things that Catherine does not understand. Similarly, Isabella is like, oh, Mr. Tilney will return because your love for him is so strong. And Catherine's like, okay, maybe we can calm down a little bit. What I really want to talk about, says Catherine, is these books that we're reading. Isabella's like, sure, but let's never forget about your love for Mr. Tilney. So it's an interesting kind of friendship in which we can really tell that Catherine is on her first jaunt into the world, right? She doesn't have the art to dissemble. She doesn't know how to put on a front. She wouldn't even know when she's meant to pretend at something, whereas Isabella is a young woman of the world, right? She knows how to flirt, she knows how to drop hints, and she just has a bad audience in Catherine, who fully does not understand it. One of the ways in which that becomes apparent is that while they're wandering around the pump room, Isabella's saying like, oh my God, these two men are staring at me. How rude of them. I'm utterly like, oh, Catherine, please, can you look to see if they're still staring at me? Because I could never deign to glance in their direction. And Catherine's like, oh, don't you worry, they're leaving. You're fine. And Isabella's like, wait, what, they're leaving? Oh, then we should go. I want to go there to show you this hat. And Catherine's like, well, that would take us past these young men again. I'm sure that you wouldn't want to. And Isabella's like, oh, I would never go out of my way to either hide from a man or be seen by him. Let's follow. And we can really tell that they have completely opposite understandings of how to approach men. But as they are sort of chasing these men while pretending not to, who would they run into except Isabella's brother, John Thorpe, and Catherine's brother, James? It's all very exciting, and Catherine is happy to see her brother again. Isabella is happy to see her own brother again. Isabella is maybe also quite happy to see Catherine's brother. And we become introduced to Thorpe. And can I just... Thorpe is the kind of guy who will not stop talking about his car, except because we're in the Georgian/Regency era. What he's talking about are his horses and his carriages, and he will not stop bragging about how fast his horse went. And even though Catherine's brother's like, well, actually, no, you're sort of wrong on the time and how far we actually went. He's like, no, my horse went this fast. And it's honestly, never has a man been more annoying on page. But Catherine knows that he is not only the brother of her very good friend, he's also the very good friend of her brother. So she's very nice to him. She's like, do you also like reading books? We're currently reading The Mysteries of Udolpho. And Thorpe is like, no, I would never read such books, except if they're written by Mrs. Radcliffe. And Catherine's like, but The Mysteries of Udolpho are written by Mrs. Radcliffe. And he's like, are you sure? Well, she did marry a Frenchman, didn't she? So maybe that's why her books are bad. We here get our first little clue that whether someone reads novels is an indicator of whether they're a good person or not. Now, this is not a black and white thing, as we will find out, but the fact that Thorpe doesn't read, but is obsessed with his carriage and his horses, does speak to what kind of person he is. The siblings, now that they've all been reunited, are chatting to each other. James Morland also meets the Allens again, and they're like, how delightful to have you here as well. And Catherine ends the day by finishing up her book. However, it's time for them to go back to the upper rooms. The upper rooms are assembly rooms in Bath where big balls are hosted. So this is also a very frequent location for the novel. Now, the dancing starts, and James, her brother, comes up to Isabella and is like, oh, won't you dance with me? And Isabella's like, no, I could never leave my friend until Catherine has someone to dance with as well. I will not deign to dance with you, because otherwise they might end up in different sets, so different groups, and they might sort of lose each other in this ballroom. But then eventually Isabella's like, your brother will not stop asking me, so I will go dance, bye-bye. And so Catherine sits there alone with Mrs. Allen and Mrs. Thorpe, these two elderly women, and she looks like no one wants to dance with her. Because she's just sitting there, she is sort of thinking about how miserable she is when suddenly Mr. Tilney walks in with a young woman. And here we again get our narrator sort of poking fun at Catherine, while in a way also highlighting how good of a person she is. Because the narrator is like, every young woman in this situation would imagine that the woman that her beloved is with is undoubtedly his wife or someone he's interested in, and that he has lied. But Catherine's brain doesn't work like that. Catherine is like, oh yeah, Henry mentioned his sister and that they spend a lot of time together. That must be his sister. How lovely. right? So in her naivety, she's not being a very good dramatic heroine, but she is being a lovely person. And so they are introduced to one another, and Miss Tilney, Henry's sister, is a lovely woman. She's a little bit more hesitant, or perhaps a little bit more formal than Isabella is. So the two of them kind of struggled to get into a conversation. Catherine really wants to have that same instantaneous, oh my God, we love the same things vibe that she had with Isabella. It's not entirely getting there, but they're all being very nice to one another. They are at this ball. Tilney is back, and Catherine, all she wants to do is dance with him, but unfortunately, the previous day, she had promised John Thorpe, Isabella's brother, that she would dance with him, and he has just sort of disappeared. He's off somewhere else, and so Tilney starts dancing with another woman, and she's a little bit heartbroken by this. Then John Thorpe does show up, and he's like, yeah, I was talking to a man about a horse. And she's like, oh, okay. So Catherine is a little bit unhappy. She had wanted to dance with Tilney, but she couldn't because she'd promised John Thorpe. And then John Thorpe had just been doing whatever and not dancing with her. And then she missed the chance to talk and dance with Tilney. So she's not entirely happy with John Thorpe, but she also knows that maybe he didn't actively do anything wrong. But the next day, she plans to actually get to know Miss Tilney a little bit better. So she wants to get ready and go to the pump room so that she can maybe run into her and they can have a conversation. And as she's getting ready, suddenly John Thorpe comes running up the stairs to the apartment where she's staying out with the Allens. And he's like, well, wasn't all of this great? Anyway, Miss Morland, get ready, we're leaving. And she's like, where? And he's like, well, we all agreed to take a drive together this morning. We're going to Claverton Down. And she's like, did we agree on that? I'm sure that maybe the idea was floated, but I didn't know that we'd made a plan. And she is talked into, nonetheless, going along on this jaunt. She is in one carriage with John Thorpe. Isabella and her brother are in another carriage following them. And again, Thorpe will not stop talking about his horse. And here we get an insight into what kind of character John Thorpe is, because he's like, my horse and my carriage are the best. The one that your brother is driving is an absolute wreck. I wouldn't be surprised if they crash. And because Catherine takes things seriously and couldn't imagine that someone would just be bragging or saying stupid things to make himself look better, she's like, oh my God, you should go, like, we need to stop and you need to tell my brother that his carriage is not in order. And then Thorpe is like, oh, no, it's fine. Actually, I could probably drive that all the way myself. And she's like, what are you, Okay. She's not entirely sure what is going on. She doesn't really like John Thorpe, but again, he's her best friend's brother and her brother's best friend. So when they get home, she talks to Mrs. Allen, and it turns out that Mrs. Allen did go to the pump room and did see Miss Tilney. And she's like, that's a shame. I could have, instead of sitting on this carriage with this annoying man who I'm quite willing to admit now is disagreeable, I could have been talking to Miss Tilney in the pump room. Anyway, that evening, they all go to the theatre. We get some kind of background flirting between James, Catherine's brother, and Isabella, although Catherine is naive enough that she doesn't really see any of this, and she also doesn't see the Tilneys, which is quite upsetting to her. But then the next day they are back in the pump rooms, and again, James and Isabella are chatting up a storm together, and Catherine is sort of like the third wheel to this entire adventure, and she's not feeling that excited until Miss Tilney arrives, and she's like, yay! So the two have a conversation, and it's very clear that Catherine is being adorable, and that Miss Tilney likes her. That although it's a little bit more subdued than her friendship with Isabella, that the two women are getting along very well. She also finds out that most likely they will be at the ball that is being organized tomorrow, and so now she has all the reasons to be excited and to get dressed up, and then she gets to the ball. Isabella's like, I will dance with your brother again. I'm just letting you know now, so you also need to dance with John so that it doesn't look weird. And Catherine does like a... She does this like ducking behind a pillar thing when John Thorpe actually walks in, because she's like, I will not waste my time with him if I can in any way get out of it. So then when Mr. Tilney is there, he does ask her to dance again, and she's super excited, and so they stand up to go dancing, and then John Thorpe shows up and he's like, hey, I thought we were going to dance. And she's like, no, you never asked me, because I was avoiding you. And he's like, well, but I only came here to dance with you. How dare you? Everyone's going to make fun of me because I've been telling them that I want to dance with you and now you're dancing with another man. And she's like, that's not my problem. Go away. And then she and Tilney have quite a fun conversation where he's like, and who is that? Now, as they are dancing, Catherine notices that she's being looked at by a somewhat commanding, handsome, elderly man. And she's like, who is this? And she sees him talking to Mr. Tilney. And it's only afterwards, when he comes back to her, that he's like, that's my father, General Tilney. And she's like, oh, he knows about me. Intimidating. It feels like a good sign, right? That Mr. Tilney's father now knows who she is and doesn't seem to have any immediate negative opinions about it or anything. And the evening ends even better because she gets invited to go for a country walk with Henry Tilney and his sister, and they agree the next day at 12 o'clock, as long as it doesn't rain, we are going on a walk. And she is so excited that she dances all the way home. How cute. The next day, however, it's not looking great. The weather is shaky, and Catherine is at that window every 10 minutes being like, there's no rain yet. There's no rain. I can see the sun, so maybe it'll be a nice day. And then, unfortunately, it does start to rain, and she's like, oh no, I have to give up this trip. I was so excited. But then, at about 12:30, the weather starts to clear up, and it suddenly looks like it will be a lovely afternoon. And she's like, well, maybe surely it's not too late yet. We could still have our walk, right? Unfortunately, as she's looking out the window and being like, no, I can definitely still make this country walk, 2 carriages approach, and you will never guess who is in these carriages. It is the annoying Mr. Thorpe. It is Isabella and her brother. And she's like, what is happening here? And Mr. Thorpe comes running back up and he's like, we are going on another drive. We're going to drive to Clifton and we will dine there and it is excellent. And we are going to see a castle, Blaise Castle. And Catherine's like, oh my God, a castle? Like in all the books that I read? Are we going to walk through the corridors? And is our light going to fail? And are we going to be stuck in the dark? And she kind of gets into the idea of it. But then she's like, actually, no, I can't. Because I agreed to go for a country walk with the Tilneys. And suddenly, Mr. Thorpe is blabbing at her. And Isabella is blabbing at her. And even her brother is like, no, surely we can't, expect to go on a drive without you. And also, the weather was horrible, so why would you go on a country walk anyway? We could go see a castle. And then Thorpe is like, by the way, I saw the Tilneys. I saw the Tilneys get into a carriage and drive the complete other way from here. So they must have clearly changed their mind and they're not coming to pick you up for a country walk. And she's like, oh, really? Catherine's quite disappointed and she feels a little bit slighted. But then, well, at least there is the opportunity to go see a castle. Right? So she's like, okay, it is past their time. The Tilneys have been seen going somewhere else. So then I guess I will go on this drive. So they drive off, and then suddenly they drive straight past Mr. Tilney and his sister, who are clearly on their way towards where Catherine lives to pick her up. And they see her driving by, and she's sitting in his carriage, and she's like, turn around, Mr. Thorpe. I need to get out and apologize and stop. And Thorpe is like, no. And he actually just drives faster, right? And she is so annoyed at him for having lied to her because he clearly didn't see the Tilneys. And he's like, I could have sworn it was them. And you're like, no, you lied to me. And on top of that, not only did he lie, and so she was asked to go on this trip under false pretenses, it also turns out they set off way too late, which means they don't make it to the castle. They have to turn around at a certain point. And she is just generally quite unhappy with how all of this had gone. And Catherine is also quite upset with Isabella, who doesn't seem to understand why this is a difficult situation for her, why she feels like she has now sort of lied to the Tilneys and given them a bad impression of herself. The next day, she decides to go visit the Tilneys. And when she gets to the house, she knocks and she asks to see Miss Tilney, and she hears that Miss Tilney actually isn't in. And so she walks away, but then she suddenly sees Miss Tilney leave with her father from the house. And she's like, so she was there, but she didn't want to see me. And Catherine is sort of quite upset. But that evening they do go to a play, and it turns out that Mr. Tilney is there as well. And they sort of exchange this quite awkward nod of the head until at the end Mr. Tilney does come over to their box, so to where Catherine is sitting with the Allens and the Thorpes, and he's like, hello a little bit coldly. And again, because Catherine is not here to pretend to be cooler than she is, she's like, I am so sorry. This is the situation of what happened. I wasn't trying to be rude. I would have rather have been with the both of you, but they told me that you had left and I'm so sorry. And because of all of this is coming out, sort of Henry forgives her pretty quickly. And he's like, well, my sister did probably assume that there had been some miscommunication. And then she's like, well, actually, why were you less nice to me than your sister? If your sister was willing to be generous with me and say that it was probably not my fault, why would you take offense? Henry does not have a good answer to this. So instead they start talking about the play and they're having a lovely time. But then she sees John Thorpe, our behated, talk to General Tilney, so Henry Tilney's father, and she's like, how do these two people know each other? And Tilney's also like, I have no idea. But she then runs into Mr. Thorpe a little bit later and she's like, why were you talking to him? And he's like, I was talking about you, in fact. I know, the general thinks you're amazing and I think you're amazing. Isn't that great? And although Catherine would prefer John Thorpe not to have anything to do with her, she does sort of like the idea that General Tilney is positively disposed towards her. A good couple of days later, the whole troop is sort of together again, and Catherine agrees with Miss Tilney that they are going to have their proposed walk that next day. She then returns to her own group, where Mr. Thorpe, her brother James, and Isabella are as well, and those three have been conspiring while Catherine was talking to Miss Tilney, and they're like, remember that failed trip we took to go see that castle? We're going to do it tomorrow. You're coming. And this time Catherine is firm. She's like, no. I have literally just agreed with Miss Tilney that we will do our walk. I'm not cancelling on that again. That is incredibly rude. And Isabella's like, you could just tell her that you forgot and ask her to do it later. And she's like, no, because I didn't forget about anything else. I had no engagement. I didn't know about this drive you guys wanted to do, and I've agreed to go on a walk with her. And what I love about this moment is that although Catherine is young and although she is naive and a little bit silly, she has very strong and good morals and ethics. She's like, I've made this agreement. I'm not breaking it just because you guys want me to do something else. And Isabella starts being a bit mean and she's like, I can't believe you would prefer this new woman over me when I've been such a good friend to you. And of course, Thorpe is being absolutely annoying. And even her brother, who doesn't like that Isabella is sad, starts being a bit mean to Catherine. And as they're sort of working in on her, she's like, no, I cannot. I cannot break this agreement again. I already looked rude the last time. And at that point, Mr. Thorpe comes back to their group and is like, all is arranged. I've just gone to talk to Miss Tilney and I've told her that you forgot that you had promised us to go do something else and she's absolutely fine with you guys taking your walk on Tuesday. And Catherine is outraged, as she should be. She's like, what do you mean you have gone to talk to her on my behalf? This is the rudest thing that anyone has ever done. Let me go. And she not entirely runs, but let me say speed walks out of the rooms because Miss Tilney has already left, and she catches up with her and sort of entirely out of breath. She's like, I've come running. It was a mistake. I didn't do this. I told them not to come talk to you. I want to go on a walk with you. And it is, again, so sweet that Miss Tilney absolutely forgives her. She was quite confused by what was going on. But again, I think Miss Tilney is a bit more of the world, so she understands that Thorpe is trying to monopolize Catherine's time for himself, right? So she forgives Catherine and they agree to go on their walk. And for the rest of the day, Mr. Thorpe, Isabella, and her brother James are being quite cold to Catherine. And she's a little bit upset and confused by it because she feels like she's done the right thing, but some of the people she likes best are upset with her for it. And Mrs. Allen is useless in these occasions because, again, the woman has no single independent thought. So Catherine talks to Mr. Allen and she's like, here is the situation. Do you think I should have done something different? And he's like, no, absolutely not. First of all, you made an agreement and it's good that you stuck by it. Second of all, and this is the first time anyone brings this up to Catherine, which is quite important, Mr. Allen says it is quite inappropriate for young women and young men to be driving about the country in open carriages with no one else around. right? Once is one thing, but if you keep doing this, it gives a certain impression, and you should be aware of that. Catherine did not know this. And Mrs. Allen pops in being like, oh yes, no, indeed, that is very strange. And Catherine's like, you have never said that this is strange, Mrs. Allen. You said I should go. So Catherine feels reinforced in the fact that she's made the right choices, and now she's a little bit unsure if maybe she should tell Isabella and give Isabella a heads up, like, hey, apparently it's a bit weird for us to be riding carriages with men that we're not related to. And Mr. Allen's like, no, I think she's old enough to know what she's doing, actually. If she and your brother want to go around and do this, that's a different thing than you doing it. Now, the next day, because Catherine has stuck to her guns, she gets to go on her country walk. And we find out a little bit more about Tilney, which is that Tilney likes to be super annoying. He and his sister clearly love each other very much. They have a very good relationship, but Henry likes to sort of push it with his comments, not in a full devil's advocate way. Well, for example, they're talking about novels, and that Henry also loves reading, and that Miss Tilney also loves reading these horrid Gothic novels, but that she also likes history. And Catherine is like, yeah, I can't read history books. I find them so boring, which is weird because history is super interesting, but the way that it's written about is boring. And then Catherine tells them, I hear something horrid is going to happen in London. It's going to come out there, and I hope it contains murder. And Miss Tilney's like, oh my God, I hope no one gets murdered. And then Henry Tilney is like, let me put you two on the same page. Catherine is talking about a book, dear sister. And and he makes some like weird remarks about, you know, how his sister is silly and how sometimes women's brains just get too excited, right? And his sister interrupts and she's like, Henry, I know you. I know that you're being weird, but the impression you're giving Miss Morland is that you don't like women. Can you calm down, please? Can you be nice to people that you don't fully know yet? So what is quite cute about this, on the one hand, Henry Tilney is constantly sort of teaching Catherine things. He also teaches her how to appreciate landscapes and art and flowers and stuff. And we heard in her introduction that she did not care for a garden, and he kind of explains appreciating nature to her, which can feel insufferable. But I feel like the way that it is done is that he is genuinely excited to share what he thinks with someone, and Catherine is very happy and open to take that on board and to learn things. But as we've also just seen in the previous scene, she is capable of sticking to her own guns and staying with her own opinions when she believes them to be correct, right? So I feel like it's quite nicely balanced. But they have a lovely walk, and she gets invited to dinner, and it's all just quite perfect. Meanwhile, Isabella has decided to forgive Catherine for not being rude to other people. Now, one of the reasons Isabella is quite nice to Catherine is because she wants her to come over. So when Catherine then comes over to where they're staying, the Thorpes, Isabella is all in an uproar, and she's like, oh my God. It turns out that they did go for their drive while Catherine was off on her walk with the Tilneys, and her brother has proposed to Isabella, and now she and James Morland are engaged, and Isabella's like, oh, you must have known that this was happening. And Catherine is like, no, literally, I saw none of the signs. I didn't know that y'all were flirting in front of me, which is very cute. But Catherine is so excited for Isabella, and she's like, yay, we're going to be actual sisters. And Isabella's like, yeah, I just hope that, you know, your parents agree and that your father will provide well for us. And Catherine's like, absolutely, all our parents want is for us to be happy, so they're going to support James. And Isabella's like, well, it's not like I need much money. I just want a nice little villa here. And Catherine's like, well, you'll have to come and live near us in Fullerton. And of course, they're going to do whatever they can. Now, James has ridden off to Fullerton, which is where the Morlands live, to get permission from his parents and to find out what they're going to do. And eventually they get a letter a day or two later from James saying, yes, my parents have agreed. They're more than happy for us, and we're now going to figure out how much money he can give us or in what way he can provide so that we can start our own life together. And everyone's super excited. Catherine had been invited to dinner with the Tilneys, and it is quite cute because her expectations were so high that disappointment is inevitable, as the narrator says herself. She had sort of, I don't know what she had imagined, but the dinner is a little bit cold a little bit stiff. She thought that after their walk, she'd gotten into a really good place with Mr. Tilney Henry and his sister. But now that the general is here, the atmosphere is a little bit different. But the general is super nice to her, and he keeps sort of asking about little details and trying to sort of show off how amazing his house is, but also trying to sort of be fake humble about it, etc. After this, she meets up with Isabella again, and they end up going to a ball. And it is not just Henry Tilney and his sister there, but also their elder brother, Captain Tilney, who has arrived in Bath. And what is quite odd is that, Henry Tilney and Catherine are dancing again, and it's lovely. And at that point, Captain Tilney comes up to Henry and is like, "Do you think that woman over there would dance with me?" It turns out that they're talking about Isabella. And so Catherine is like, "Oh, absolutely not. Isabella told me explicitly that she wouldn't be dancing because, she's engaged to my brother." And Captain Tilney is like, "Okay, sure, whatever." And then when she looks around a little bit later, Isabella is dancing with Captain Tilney. And Catherine feels betrayed. Or maybe betrayed is too strong a word. She's just confused because Isabella keeps having these super strong opinions and then doing something else anyway. And she's like, "I thought you weren't going to dance with anyone because of my brother and because you miss him while he's away." And Isabella's like, "Oh yeah, no, well, obviously I prefer your brother and I love him. But, well, he kept pushing and there's nothing I can do about that." What makes it weirder is that the next day they get another letter from James. And this time it is agreed that Mr. Morland will give them £400 a year, or he will give them a position, a living of £400 a year. And that cannot happen straight away. They would have to be engaged for a year or two until that position becomes available, and then James can have that position, then they can get married, etc. And Isabella is a little bit unhappy about this. She's like, "I'm sure your father has been as generous as he can be, but this is not a whole lot of money." And Catherine is sort of trying to defend her father. She's like, "I'm sure he's done as much as he can afford to do." And Isabella's like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm sure he's not, it's a long engagement and it's not a whole lot of money and etc. etc." So Catherine is a little bit uncomfortable, but she also believes that the main reason Isabella isn't happy is because of how long it takes until they can get married. Now, up to this point, we're about halfway through the book. 6 weeks or so have passed. Or the 6th week is about to start, and that is roughly how long the Allens plan to be in Bath. And Catherine is a little bit nervous because she's like, "Oh my god, if they decide to leave Bath, I have to leave Bath with them and I'll never see Henry Tilney again." Well, thankfully, it turns out that the Allens are staying, and so she is super excited and she meets Miss Tilney, and Miss Tilney is like, "Oh, we're leaving Bath at the end of the week." And she's like, "Wow, that's a shame." But then suddenly, her father, Miss Tilney's father, appears and he's like, "Have you asked her yet?" And Miss Tilney's like, "No, I haven't had a chance." And so he turns to Catherine and he's like, "Would you come and stay with us in Northanger Abbey? You've been a great friend to my daughter and I'm sure she would love to have you with us." And she's like, "Oh my god, an abbey?" I love abbeys. In all my books, abbeys is always where the big drama happens. And also, of course, she would love to stay with the Tilneys, right? So she's like, "I'm going to write home to my parents to see if they agree." The Allens also agree. Her parents are like, "Yeah, sure. If the Allens think that they're good people, then that's absolutely fine." And so Catherine is on cloud 9. She's like, "Not only do I get to increase my relationship, my intimacy with the Tilneys, I'm going to get to go to an abbey." So she is in all kinds of daydreams and preparations, etc. And she sort of hardly sees Isabella in this time. Isabella isn't really seeking her out, but she also isn't really seeking Isabella out. So when they do meet up again, Isabella, is still a little bit in the dumps about James not being back yet, but also about the whole thing with how much money they're going to have, etc. And it sort of comes up a little bit that she is still in touch with Captain Tilney, so Henry's older brother. Catherine is like, why? She doesn't really understand. Because she doesn't really understand, she also can't imply anything, if that makes sense, right? She doesn't really understand this whole mild flirtation that is happening. And because Isabella is like, yes, I prefer your brother, she decides to take that at face value. But to us, the more informed reader, it is very clear that that flirtation is maybe a little bit more than just a flirtation. It is so much on Catherine's mind, in fact, that she decides to speak to Henry about it, which I think is a lovely sign of how comfortable she feels with him already. Because although the Tilneys are going back to Northanger Abbey and taking Catherine with them, Captain Tilney is staying in Bath. So she talks to Henry and she's like, your brother is aware that Isabella is engaged to my brother, right? And Henry's like, yes, he does know this. And in her endless innocence, Catherine is like, then why is he staying? Why is he talking to her? And Henry sort of tries to make clear to her that he is not in a position to convince his older brother to do anything or to change his approach to this situation. And Catherine is upset because she's like, this could hurt my brother, you know? And Henry is a little bit like, okay, so maybe my brother is not being the best person in the world by flirting with Isabella, but isn't it Isabella who is actually in the wrong? She is the one who's engaged to your brother. And James could only be hurt by this situation if she is reciprocating the flirting. And Catherine is having a bit of a moment where she's like, yeah, no, that is actually true. Like, Isabella is acting wrong. Even if I don't believe that she's doing it on purpose, right? Like, Catherine has a very strong conviction that people tend to act out of their better natures rather than maybe having any kind of ill intent. So Henry kind of assures her, like, don't worry, my brother is not interested in marrying Isabella or taking her away from your brother. He's just having a bit of fun. It will all be fine. And so Catherine decides to be easy about it. She's like, okay, I believe Isabella will stay loyal to my brother. I now know that Captain Tilney doesn't want to take her away from my brother. I'm going to put that out of my mind. And so with all happiness, they can head off to Northanger Abbey. She gets to drive there with Mr. Tilney, and along the way, he sort of realizes that she's quite excited about being in an abbey. And he again pokes fun at her. And he's like, do you imagine it like one of the abbeys in your Gothic novels, right? And then he sort of tells her this story of how her first night at Northanger Abbey is going to be, which is very clearly inspired by these Gothic novels. And he's like, you're going to arrive and an elderly, strange servant will lead you to this room that is so far away from all the other rooms, and the light will fail and you will find an old cupboard, and inside that cupboard you will find a manuscript and all this kind of stuff, right? And Catherine gets really into it and she's like, oh my God, no, do tell me more. And eventually she gets then a little bit embarrassed and she's like, oh, okay, wait. He's just telling me a story and I'm just getting too excited about it. And he enjoys teasing her a bit. And then they finally get to the abbey, and she loves being in an abbey, but it's not quite matching her expectations. It's not quite as Gothic as she had maybe hoped for, but it is lovely and she's excited to be there. And her apartment, so the rooms that she gets are very modern. There's nothing dark, damp, ghostly, Gothic about them. They have every comfort that she might need, right? Now, she is noticing a little bit of a change in Miss Tilney now that they're in Northanger Abbey, right? Miss Tilney is a lovely young woman. She's very friendly and open and warm, but now she seems a little bit anxious. And she's like, okay, we've arrived. I need to come pick you up in like 10 minutes so that we can go to dinner, because that's when my father wants to have dinner. So I'll be back. And she leaves Catherine to sort of get changed from their travel clothes. Catherine is taking this time to kind of look about the room and be like, oh my God, there is actually a chest here. That is so weird. She gets a little bit in her head about what she might see in this room and what she might find in the cupboards. And she's going to have a look, and she opens up drawers and there's nothing in there. And then she opens up another drawer and there is paper there. And she's like, oh my God, so exciting. But then, well, she gets called to dinner. And when she comes back by lamplight, she's going to like read the papers that she has found, but she falls asleep because she's tired. And then actually when she has a look at these mysterious papers that she found, it turns out to be like a laundry receipt. It's literally like 2 shirts washed, 1 pair of trousers washed. Like, and she's like, why have I gotten into such a tizzy about about these papers that I would find. And she's like, I can't tell Henry that I've been this insane because this is his house. And I started to imagine all kinds of mysterious manuscripts that were flying around here. Now, while they're in Northanger Abbey, Henry can't actually stay with them all the time because he has the curacy in Woodston, which is a little ways away. And so he has to be there every once in a while for a couple of days. So he leaves. And at this point, she gets something of a tour of the Abbey. And this is a consistent disappointment for Catherine because, again, when she was told that she was going to be staying in an abbey, she had imagined a Gothic masterpiece full of, again, dark, damp corridors and dungeons and history. And it turns out that although this abbey might have had all of that, it's been modernized and renovated. And so there actually isn't all that much. What she does find out, and she had found, I didn't mention it earlier, but she had heard earlier that Mrs. Tilney, so Henry and Miss Tilney's mother, had died quite a while ago when they were a bit younger. And that's, of course, a shame, and she was very sad about it. But now she seems to find out a little bit more about it because the one thing that General Tilney does not want to show her in the Abbey are the rooms where Mrs. Tilney used to live, the rooms where she died. He also seems to be quite harsh with his daughter, with Miss Tilney, even if he's very nice to Catherine herself. And she's like, I don't know how to feel about this dude. And she talks to Miss Tilney a bit more about her mother. And she finds out that Mrs. Tilney died from a very sudden illness, that actually Miss Tilney wasn't in the Abbey at the time. She came too late and her mother was already dead when she returned. And Catherine's like, oh my God, so no one was here when she died except for the general, who I'm starting to feel is a little bit weird. And let's just say Catherine gets in her head. And this is where Catherine has to learn one of her big lessons. Because out of all of these random little context clues, the fact that Mrs. Tilney died while Miss Tilney wasn't there, that General Tilney is a bit weird towards his family, that he wouldn't let her into the apartments where Mrs. Tilney used to live, Catherine starts spinning this story that maybe General Tilney murdered his wife. And then she's like, no, maybe he didn't murder her. Maybe he pretended she died and he's keeping her prisoner somewhere in the Abbey where he won't let her see. And she sort of becomes quite convinced of this. So the next day, she sneaks into the apartments of Mrs. Tilney that she wasn't allowed to see before. And again, these apartments are beautiful. There is nothing Gothic, nothing weird about them. There is no chains. There's no woman being kept in secret. And as she's standing there, she is surprised by Henry Tilney, who has come back earlier than expected. And he's like, what are you doing in here? And because Catherine is kind of caught in the moment, she admits that actually, she was sort of suspecting his father of murder or imprisonment. And Henry is like, Catherine, we are in England. We are in reality. We are not in a novel. Do you think these kind of things could happen here without the law getting involved? Like, I was here when my mother died. I saw her get ill, an illness that she'd had before as well. We called the doctors. My older brother was here. Yes, Miss Tilney, who's called Eleanor, by the way, came too late. But like, I was here when she died and my father was very sad. What ideas have you been admitting in your head? Is the almost direct quote. And Catherine is so ashamed. So deeply ashamed, not only that she had these thoughts, but that she entertained them for so long, that she admitted them to Henry, and she's completely sure that Henry, if he loved her before, even liked her before, that is over, because she's been absurd and she's been admittedly somewhat crazy in her thinking, okay? So she sort of hides in her room. And she has this realization that although these Gothic novels, these books like The Mysteries of Udolpho by Mrs. Radcliffe, although they are amazing, they don't fully reflect reality. She is maybe a little bit weird about it in the sense that she's like, I live in England. That is not the same as the places that are featured in these books, right? Because a lot of these Gothic books kind of take place in Italy or in the Alps, but not in England. But then at dinner, Henry is actually very nice to her, and she feels like he has forgiven her for being insane. And she has learned her lesson. She's like, I'm going to be a little bit more normal, but apparently I am forgiven. He's not going to tell anyone else that I thought his dad was a murderer. So we're good, right? Now the only worry that she has is that she hasn't received any letters from Isabella, even though Isabella was like, I'm absolutely going to write to you when you're in Northanger Abbey and you need to tell me everything about the Abbey. But she hasn't heard anything, except then one day she gets a letter from her brother. Her brother writes to her that his engagement to Isabella is over. He's like, I hope that you'll be gone from Northanger Abbey before Captain Tilney comes back to make his engagement known. I'm heartbroken. And Catherine is just sitting there reading this letter at a breakfast table like, what is happening? And Henry and his sister Eleanor, Miss Tilney, are sort of like, can we do anything? And she's just like, no, I need to process. And she's sad and she's confused and she's conflicted. And then she sort of goes back into the breakfast room where Henry and Eleanor are sitting. And she's like, okay, I would ask that if you find out Captain Tilney is going to come to Northanger Abbey, you let me know so that I can leave. And they're like, I mean, we could, but like, why? Henry is like, does this have anything to do with Isabella? And Catherine's like, well, I guess if you've already guessed where this is going, you can read the letter. And so she gives the letter to Henry and then to Eleanor to read. And they're very confused because they're like, wait, does Isabella Thorpe have money? And Catherine's like, no. And they're like, then why would our brother want to marry her? That's absolutely not going to happen. But Catherine's like, but my brother writes that they're going to be engaged. And so they're all in this state of confusion where Henry and his sister are very convinced that their brother would never marry a girl like Miss Thorpe. But Catherine is like, then, well, that's all the information I have. So they're all sort of left in this state of ambiguity. But Catherine is quite relieved to have been able to talk to them about it. And they keep talking about it occasionally. However, Captain Tilney never shows up. He also never sends a letter to talk about what has happened. And Catherine is like, Henry, should you maybe talk to your father about this? And Henry's like, I am not going to talk to my father about this. If my brother wants to make a mess, he can take care of it himself. Now, at this point, we also find out that General Tilney is still being quite nice to Catherine. He obviously doesn't know that she thought he killed anyone. And she is trying to be nicer about him as well because she feels guilty about having thought he was capable of murder. And so at a certain point, the general suggests that they all go visit Henry when he's back in Woodston, so where he actually lives and works. And Catherine is so excited because she just wants to know more about him, right? Like, although she's clearly like falling in love with him, she's not quite thinking ahead enough to actually imagine that all of this might be leading to something, right? She's not entirely there yet. So she's very excited. They go visit him in Woodston. He has a beautiful house there and he's really done a lot of work on like the garden, and he has dogs, and the puppy is super cute, and she's like playing with the puppy, and Henry's like looking at her, and the general's like, yes, this house is perfect, except that what of course it needs is a woman's touch. And Catherine's like, yeah, that sounds great. And the general's like, ka-ching. And Catherine is not understanding that she is being, gently shown this place in the sense of, would you ever deign to live here, right? So she's having a beautiful time there. They go back to the Abbey and she receives a letter from Isabella. And Isabella, the nerve, is like, could you write to your brother and tell him to like come chat with me, because like clearly we misunderstood each other, and Captain Tilney is the worst and I hope to never see him again. He did tell me I looked very pretty, but there's nothing there, and yeah, maybe just tell your brother to please write to me. And Catherine has grown enough to recognize how shameless part of this letter is, that it's also full of contradictions. That on the one hand, Isabella is talking about how much she loves James Morland, but she also keeps talking about Captain Tilney. And it's very clear that Captain Tilney has zero intention of marrying her, that he was just flirting with her or whatever, and has made her embarrass herself in public, basically. And Henry is like, yeah, this is what I feared my brother would have done. Here it depends on how you feel about the book and what your own opinions are. It can feel a bit victim blamey, where you're like, well, Isabella wanted to have a good marriage with maybe someone who had a lot of money. So even though she had gotten engaged to James Morland, here is Captain Tilney, who comes from a better family with more money. Can we fully blame her for maybe trying to catch him as well? And now she's ended up with no one, with her reputation somewhat dragged through the mud. is that entirely her fault? And on the one hand, she's not a great person. She's shown to be quite superficial in certain ways. She's like playing the game, but she's also treating herself as an object. And yeah, it's difficult. But Catherine basically decides she's not going to answer this letter. She's over it. She's done with it. At that point, the question comes up of like, hey, how long should Catherine stay at Northanger Abbey? She's been there for a couple of weeks already and she's really enjoying it, but maybe it's rude for her to stay. So she talks to Miss Tilney, Eleanor, about it, and she's like, no, I want you to stay much longer. And she's like, great, I also want to stay much longer. And their visit gets even better because General Tilney has to go to London. And as he leaves, the atmosphere lightens. They're having fun. They can do whatever they want. Henry sometimes has to be in Woodston, but sometimes he's at the Abbey. It's all great fun. They've decided she's going to stay for much longer. She goes to bed that evening. There's a weird knock. Someone has clearly arrived. And suddenly Miss Tilney, Eleanor, comes to Catherine's room and she says, you have to go now. Her father has just returned. General Tilney has stormed into Northanger Abbey and basically told Eleanor that they're going to go to Hereford, and Catherine can therefore not stay. Not only can she not stay, she has to leave tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. And she will not be given a servant to go home with. She will not be given any carriages or anything. She will have to take the post. And Catherine is sort of like, why would General Tilney treat me this way? What have I done wrong? Have I done something wrong? And poor Eleanor is so ashamed to have to do this, right? And Eleanor, so Miss Tilney, is much more aware of how dangerous the situation actually is and also how shameful it is. Because Catherine feels the personal injury much more than the social one. She's like, why am I being thrown out of this house when everyone's been so nice? I don't know what I've done wrong. Whereas Eleanor is like, it is shameful for us to put a young woman without much money out on the road, to kick her out basically overnight and to not even make sure she gets home safe. So Catherine starts packing. The next morning, Eleanor wakes up early with her, and Eleanor is like, do you actually have money to take these post carriages, right? And she's like, no, actually. Catherine realizes she doesn't have the money. So Eleanor lends her some money. And Eleanor begs her, I know that what is happening right now is so shameful and I can't really ask anything of you, but please let me know that you've arrived safely back at home, right? And initially Catherine is like, if you're not allowed to talk to me, I shouldn't write to you. She's being a little bit snippy because, she's hurt. But then she realizes, no, Eleanor doesn't want any of this. And so Catherine sort of breaks down, is like, of course I'll write to you. And she has to write to Eleanor under a fake name so that the father won't know that they've had contact. So Catherine begins a horrible journey back home. The thing is, she has to go, I think it's 70 miles or something in a post carriage. So she's going from one place to another, stepping over from one carriage to another. And this is the carriage that takes the post, takes passengers. It is not a safe journey. It's not a comfortable journey. She doesn't even know where she's going. So every time she gets dropped off by a carriage in a new place, she kind of has to ask hey, I need to get to Fullerton. What is the next stagecoach that I need to take, basically? And thankfully, because she does have some money and she's a very nice girl and it's very clear that she does know what's happening, people are nice to her and help her. Also, the fact that she's sort of so in her mind about what has happened, that she will probably never see Henry Tilney again, that she's so embarrassed and ashamed to be thrown out this way, because she's got all of that going on in her head. She's also not really thinking about the journey, so it passes quite quickly. And so our heroine returns home after quite a shameful last journey. Her parents are happy to see her, although they're also quite confused because it wasn't announced that she was coming back, etc. And she sort of explains to them what happened, and they're all quite outraged on her behalf. But because they're calm, normal people, they're also like, we don't have to take this too seriously. You're fine, you're back home, nothing happened to you. And we're quite proud, actually, that you managed a journey like this on your own. But Mrs. Morland, her mother, does soon realize that something is up with Catherine. She's not really sure what, but Catherine is not really paying attention to anything. She sort of keeps staring out the window, sighing wistfully. And she's like, strange. But then, a day or two later, maybe a couple of days actually after she's arrived, suddenly there's a stranger at the door, and it turns out that Henry Tilney has come to visit, and he's just sort of sitting there quite awkwardly with Catherine and her mother. And Catherine is just like, she's lit up, right? She's like, oh my God, Henry is here. He's not completely forgotten about me. Because Henry was away when she got kicked out of Northanger Abbey, right? And she's like, he's come to see that I'm okay. And Mrs. Morland is sort of like, I'm not entirely sure what is happening here, but well, Catherine seems happy that you're here and you've apologized for how your father treated her. So maybe I'll just let this play out, right? Because Mrs. Allen is a cool mom. So Henry and Catherine, they go to visit the Allens who live nearby. And this is a great excuse because along the way, Henry can sort of start to explain certain things that had been going on. And it turned out all the way back when they were, remember, in the theatre and Catherine had apologized to Henry for missing their walk, Thorpe had been talking to General Tilney. And apparently Thorpe had been like, Catherine's family is super rich. And not only that, she's also the ward of Mr. Allen, who's taken her to Bath, so she'll inherit from him. And he's basically bigging Catherine up. So the general was like, oh my God, my son is talking to a rich woman. Ideal. Let's make sure that we get all of that money into the family. And that's why he was being so nice to her. But then when he had just gone on a trip back to London, he had met Thorpe again. And John Thorpe was not only disappointed that obviously Isabella and James, Catherine's brother, broke up, but Catherine had also made it very clear to him that she wasn't interested in him at all, right? So now he was like, no, actually, they're super poor. They've got like 10 children who all live in squalor, and the Allens don't even care. And so he basically pretended like Catherine was some kind of gold digger. So that's why the general had come back to Northanger Abbey in a fury and kicked her out overnight. And that is incredibly rude behavior. And Henry is so sorry because when Henry then got back a day or so later and realized that Catherine had been kicked out and his father was like explaining all of this to him, Henry's like, no, I have been like, I invited Catherine to my house. I have danced with her. I've talked to her. I have also grown very fond of her, if not only fallen in love with her. I've been treating her like I was going to propose and I will. So he's basically broken with his father. He's like, I don't care that you don't like Catherine. I don't care that you think she's too poor for you. It is, I am honor bound and emotion bound to propose to her. So he has now come to Fullerton and he explains all of this to Catherine and she's like, oh my God, but of course I would marry you. Yay. And Mrs. Morland and Mr. Morland, Catherine's parents, are like, we are technically also cool with this, except your father also has to agree. He doesn't have to give you any money, but he does have to agree to the marriage. That is an honor thing. So now we have entered the last chapter of the book, and the question is, how is this going to happen? And actually, it turns out loads of things have been happening in the background because Miss Tilney has been having a sort of secret love for a man for quite a while. And her father always disapproved because this man wasn't wealthy or honorable enough. But that man has turned out to now inherit not just money, but also a very prominent title. So he's completely on board. So Eleanor, Miss Tilney, is now married. She's a viscountess, I believe. And that has put the general in a very good mood. So then Eleanor talks to her father and she's like, if I have made you so proud, how about you, as a wedding present to me, are nice to my brother and let him marry the woman he loves? And so the general's like, if he wants to be an idiot, he can be an idiot and marry that young girl. So Henry and Catherine can get married. And the final sentence of the book is, to begin perfect happiness at the respective ages of 26 and 18 is to do pretty well, and professing myself moreover convinced that the general's unjust interference, so far from being really injurious to their felicity, was perhaps rather conducive to it, by improving their knowledge of each other and adding strength to their attachment, I leave it to be settled, by whomever it may concern, whether the tendency of this work be altogether to recommend parental tyranny or reward filial disobedience. And that is Northanger Abbey. So that was quite a long summary. I've now realized while recording it, I got a bit excited, and I do have a certain amount of respect for your time. So what I'm going to do is we will end the episode here, and then I will do the next episode on Gothic literature. We'll get a little bit more into the books that Northanger Abbey talks about some aspects of Gothic literature in general, maybe some modern Gothic recommendations, and that way you can finish the episode here after what already looks like an hour and a half. I think that's long enough for everyone. So let me know what you think about Northanger Abbey. I do hope you give it a go. It's an incredibly fun book. And yeah, that's it for today. If you have questions, thoughts on the book, or recommendations or requests for future episodes, feel free to leave a comment or send me an email at bookcentralpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. You can also subscribe to be informed when new episodes drop. You can find references to the materials used today in the description. Book Central is written and produced by me, and our music is by Scott Buckley. Thank you for joining me today on the International Express to Book Central.